All right, this is data classification part 1. We have a CISSP supplement from Reduce Cyber Risk. All right, so as we're dealing with data classification, there's some key considerations that you need to be aware of as you're looking to protect the data. And again, it comes down to when you're classifying the data, it's all about protecting the data and what are you doing to ensure that it is adequately protected, right? So some key considerations to look at is how you file, categorize, or bucket your specific data. Now, this is based a lot on the sensitivity of the data. So if you have specific information that is super sensitive, you may put it in certain buckets. If you have data that is not very sensitive, you will obviously change the buckets that you put the information into. And it's designed to define and document a process for securing the data. It's a process to deal with it and how you're going to secure your specific information and your data that it goes for your company. The other reasons for the data classification process is to identify sensitive files, intellectual property, or trade secrets. So as you're looking to protect your information, you need to consider what are these things. And I've had a situation personally where I didn't really know what the trade secrets were. I didn't know what the intellectual property was, but it allowed me to have a conversation with the intellectual property owners to find out what is valuable to the company. And that's the one good thing about data classification is as you get into it, you'll find out that there are big parts of it that around that you didn't know. But when you talk to people, you'll get a good understanding of what is important to the business. It also allows you to secure this specific data. So as you don't really know where the data is at, it helps you understand where it is so that you can better secure it. It allows you to track regulated data to comply with regulations. How do you comply specifically with the regulations? And are you meeting the requirements that might be spelled out within the data classification aspects? You need to optimize your search capabilities, and this would include data indexing. How do you deal with the data specifically, and how is it indexed for your company? You means optimize the search capabilities as well. And you'd also discover statistically significant patterns that might be within the data as it relates to how you're protecting it, also where is it stored. And you may not know that these patterns even exist until you start kind of looking to classify it. So if you have a situation where you realize that my IP owners say that all of my data is high risk. Well, is that really true? Is it all high risk? So statistically, it might be that you really only have about 3% is actually high risk and that you consider it at your most sensitive information. But that's where you won't know this until you try to do some level of data classification. It also helps you avoid or optimize your storage to avoid duplication and the situation where you have all these extra documents that you really don't need. Your focus on data classification, you realize, well, hey, I've got that document someplace else. Well, I've got this one someplace else. These are all key things to look at as you're dealing with data classification. Now, there's different types of data. There's important data, or I shouldn't say there's different types of important data. There's personal identifiable data, which is your PII, which is typically what in the United States they call it is personal identifiable information. And this is tied to individuals. It could be their social security number, it could be medical numbers, it could be anything that's specifically tied to an individual. Then you have your protected health information. So you have your PII, which would be like your birthday, address, then your PHI, which is your notes from your doctor, or could be your medical records as they are stored electronically. That would be your PHI. And then there's proprietary data, which is your copyright, trade secrets, and so forth. Those are your intellectual property aspects that are set up as well. So those are really the main three types of data that you will run into: personal identifiable data, personal health information, and proprietary data. Now, there's business data that you would have that's normal type of stuff, your business classification type data, but the main highly sensitive ones are typically these three. Your business confidential data will be very specific to an individual or individual company, but as it relates to things that usually are regulated and have people that are watching them or of the highest risk to a company, it's usually these three things: PII, PHI, and your proprietary data. Now, the benefits of classification is, again, it talks about identifying the most critical data in systems that you may have your data might be residing in. So you can try to protect everything, but it's not going to work. So how do you deal with that? Well, that helps you find out where is your data stored. So you understand where it goes, or you understand what it is. Now you need to find out where it's stored, and then where does the data flow. And the purpose around this then is it helps to lend to a more secure environment for your information. And it helps to make sure that you have the proper protections and mechanisms in place to protect the information. Now, it also may be required via legal or compliance means that you have to have this data better protected. And it may also help with building out or intellectual property protection plan. So if you have the classification in place, you can have all these things ready to go. You can be set up so that your intellectual property plan is in place and it's going. You have stakeholders involved. Having data classification is a huge benefit for that. It also helps you determine who are the users that will be able to manage and access the data. Now, in the past, I've seen it where you have file shares that are set up specifically for an individual or for a group of people to access. Well, they go to this and they look at this data, but then when someone moves on to a new role, no one ever pays attention to it, and it basically becomes orphaned. And that happens a lot with information and data. So those are the definite benefits around classifications. Now, there's many more benefits around data classification. However, these are the key ones that if you focus on those will definitely help you out and take you a long ways. Now, what are the downsides of data classification? Well, it can be challenging to document and discover everything that's in your environment. It can be really, really challenging. And to find all this information, especially if your company's been around for a while, you have multiple systems that are involved, data goes everywhere. There's opportunity costs and capital expenses that are associated with this classification as well. So as you do your data classification, there's costs that'll be tied to it. You also need to have a strong business buy-in on what you're doing. That they need to be able to influence your leadership to help you with this process, but there is some serious opportunity costs involved and capital expenses that are associated with doing it. So just the key point of all this is it's not easy. It really, really isn't. The other thing around classification can be really hard to do. So we talk about opportunity costs, but there can be a lot of physical barriers and also process barriers that you're going to have to work through as you're dealing with data classification. It's not a panacea. It's really hard lifting. Once it's done, you'll be happy it's done, but it's really some heavy lifting that you're going to have to do. Now, there's some criteria to classify the data. It's pretty substantial. Now, when you get into this, you need to look at some key things around it. Usefulness of data. How useful is the information to the company? Now, it could be useful to you, but it may not be useful to the main people that count, right? So you need to understand how useful is it to the business owners. Also, the value or cost of the data. Is it a big value of it? Does it your intellectual property that if the secret sauce to the Kentucky Fried Chicken, that's not sauce, they more have the 11 herbs and spices, but if there's a certain kind of formula or recipe that it makes you differentiate you from the competitors, if that thing is lost, that information is lost, how much of a value is that to your company? Data disclosure or modification damage. I mean, does it affect your reputational aspects of your company? Is there a business impact as it relates to data disclosure? So in many cases, this would happen, and this would cause significant issues with your company. So you got to ask yourself, what does that mean? How does that affect you and your business? So again, those are some key criteria that you need to consider. And that's not all of them, but again, usefulness of data, value or the cost of the data, and then potentially data disclosure. So as we talked about the criteria around the data classification, we also need to talk about the process. What is your classification process? Now, this comes down to is you identify an owner. How do you do that? You have to identify someone who's going to own the data and who's going to be responsible for it specifically. And again, it could be you could have a lot of data that's orphaned, and you're just going to have to pick somebody. Whether they like it or not, they're going to be the data owner. And then you have to work through with them on how to get it cleaned up. You need to determine how the data will be classified and labeled. Now, this comes down to physical systems, also to electronic systems. How are you going to classify and label the information? How are you going to classify the appropriate data from is it like a partial system? Is it going to be unclassified, classified, top secret? How are you going to deal with that? Is it going to be and I would recommend that something smaller or a partial system is way better than nothing at all. Do you have an exception process in place to deal with this? There'll be times when you're going to have some level of exceptions to the data or to your criteria as well. You need to determine security controls to be used. What will those controls be? How are you going to manage those controls? And then procedures to declassify the resources and the procedures to transfer the information once it's classified. So you need to have documented procedures around how you're going to handle and move data around. And then also an enterprise or a business level instruction on how you're going to teach your people. Because if you don't have a way to teach your people and they don't really know how to do it, you're just setting yourself up for a lot of issues. So there's some key aspects around classification process that you should not be aware of. All right, I hope you enjoyed this with Reduced Cyber Risk. We are going to be done for the day. We're going to go ahead and come back around to part 2. You'll get that next week as it relates to the data classification aspects of it. But I hope you enjoyed what you got here today. It's been a pleasure of mine to be able to serve you guys, but I hope everything's going well in your lives. Bottom line is, if you like this information, check me out on Facebook. Go to Facebook.com and check out Sean Gerber and Reduce Cyber Risk. Also, you can check me out on LinkedIn as well. Make sure that you go to reducecyberrisk.com. I've got a lot of free stuff there for you as well that you can check out, and it's awesome stuff. All right, thanks a lot for joining me today at Reduce Cyber Risk. This is Sean Gerber. Have a great day. Talk to you later. See ya. Thanks so much for joining me today on my podcast. If you like what you heard, please leave a review on iTunes. I would greatly appreciate any and all feedback. Also, check out my videos that are on YouTube. Just search for Sean, that's S-H-O-N, Gerber, and you'll find a plethora of content to help secure your business. Lastly, head to Reduce Cyber Risk and look for the free stuff, lots of free stuff. And it's only available for our email subscribers. It's growing each and every day. Thanks again for listening. See ya!